Uncle Ryan, help. My mom fell down and won't get up.
The little girl's choked voice trembled through the phone, quivering as if it might shatter at any moment. But on the other end of the line, the one listening was not Uncle Ryan from downstairs. It was a stranger, a man's deep, husky voice, as though he had just been pulled out of an entirely different world. For a few brief seconds, he was silent. The girl, panicked, didn't realize she had dialed the wrong number. Her breath came in gasps, and sobs pressed down hard. She only managed to repeat once more, even more desperate. "Please, sir. My mom isn't breathing. Apartment 3B, above Joe's garage. Red door. On the highest floor of a glass tower in the city." Adrian Cross stood frozen by the wide window. The city beneath his feet glittered with lights cold and distant. In his hand, the phone was still pressed tightly to his ear, where that pleading child's voice echoed without pause. Adrian asked nothing more. He didn't call an assistant. He didn't call the police. Just one decision, swift and sharp as a blade, slicing through the night. "I'll come right away. Don't be afraid." Apartment 3B, located above the small repair shop, was far from luxurious. Peeling walls, drafty windows, and in the dim light of the kitchen, Marissa Hale lay motionless on the floor. She had pushed herself all day long from the noisy diner to a cleaning shift at the hotel, then rushing home to care for her 7-year-old daughter, burning with fever. Years of being a single mother had drained her strength. Tonight, that fragile body finally gave out. Elila, with her tangled brown curls, still sat on the floor beside her mother, clutching the phone to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet her eyes stayed wide open, strangely brave. She didn't understand who the uncle on the other end was. She only knew there had been a calm, steady voice promising to come, and to a child, that promise meant more than anything. 13 minutes later, a sleek black SUV shot down the narrow alley, braking hard in front of Joe's garage. The car door swung open. A tall man stepped out, long dark coat flaring in the night wind. His eyes swept the scene quickly, fixing on the worn red door with the faint 3B on its plate. He didn't knock softly, just 3 firm raps. The door cracked open, revealing the tear-stained face of a small girl. Her sock-covered feet were soaked from the cold floor. You came," the girl whispered, her voice breaking, a mix of astonishment and relief. Adrian nodded. "I promised. Didn't I?" And as he stepped into that shabby apartment, he had no idea that this wrong number would turn the course of his life, transforming him from a solitary man at the pinnacle of power into someone who would discover where he truly belonged. Hurried footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor late at night. The staff on duty hadn't yet grasped what was happening when a tall man burst in, carrying an unconscious woman in his arms. Beside him, a small girl ran close, clutching tightly to the hem of his long coat, panting for breath. "Emergency? Right now." His voice was deep, cold, leaving no room for refusal. The nurse at the desk hesitated. "Sir, you need to register first, so we can—" Adrian cut her off, eyes sharp as steel. "She doesn't have time for paperwork." In an instant, the authority in his voice set the once quiet corridor into motion. A gurney was rushed over, and medical staff quickly received Marissa. Adrian bent down to lay her on it, his movements unexpectedly careful and gentle for someone with such a cold exterior. Lila still clung tightly to his hand. Her wide, tearful eyes looked up, her voice small but steady. You won't leave my mom, will you?" Adrian froze, then lowered his gaze into that childlike stare. In that moment, a memory flickered of a boy long ago who had also begged for someone to come save his mother. But no one came, not ever. He gave a slight nod, his voice low and firm. "I promise. I won't." The night shift rushed about. Doctors confirmed Marissa was suffering from severe exhaustion, dehydration, and dangerously low blood pressure. But thankfully, no injuries. After IV fluids and monitoring, she began to stabilize. In the waiting area, Adrian sat still, his tall frame taking up most of the bench. Next to him, Lila leaned her head against his arm, never taking her eyes off the emergency room door. Each time a nurse walked by, she looked up expectantly. Adrian stayed silent, only handing her a warm bottle of water from the vending machine. Over an hour later, the door opened. A nurse stepped out with an update. She's awake. Stable condition. You can visit her now. Lila leapt up, tugging Adrian's hand. Inside, the room was white, sharp with disinfectant. On the hospital bed, Marissa slowly opened her eyes. She frowned, startled to see a stranger standing there, while her daughter clung to his hand, as though she had known him all along. Her throat was parched, her voice hoarse. "Who are you?" Adrian took a step forward, speaking low and slow. "The one your daughter dialed by mistake. But I brought you here." Marissa blinked, fragments of memory surfacing the kitchen, the yellow light, her body collapsing to the floor. Then darkness. Now she awoke in a hospital bed, her daughter safe beside her. Gratitude and wariness both tightened her chest. "Thank you for helping me," she whispered, gripping Lila's small hand. Adrian said nothing, only nodded. He turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, a nurse entered with a folder. "The fees have already been settled. All the paperwork's been signed." Marissa froze. "Paid. But I—" Her eyes darted toward the man who was already turning away. He didn't look back, only left a brief reply. "Just take your daughter home. Don't worry about the rest." Suddenly, Lila ran after him. Clutching an old teddy bear she called Mr. Bear. One ear was frayed, its button eye sewn on crooked, but clearly it had been treasured more than any toy. She looked up, pushing it into Adrian's hand, her voice trembling yet firm. "I don't have anything to give you. Only Mr. Bear. Please take him, so you'll remember that you saved my mom." Adrian faltered for a moment. He was used to extravagant gifts, polished words of thanks, but had never been offered something so simple and genuine. Those large hands, accustomed to billion-dollar contracts, now held a worn, faded stuffed bear. In that moment, he didn't feel like a powerful billionaire at all, just a man whom a child had entrusted with pure, unshaken faith, a faith so innocent it made his heart stir. A week later, as her health gradually returned, Marissa unexpectedly saw Adrian again during a follow-up appointment. Their brief conversation opened a piece of her past she rarely shared. Marissa had once been head nurse at St. Alder Memorial Hospital, a major city hospital. Years of dedication had made her believe nursing was her lifelong calling. But one fateful night, a 7-year-old patient, a boy named Connor, was admitted in critical condition after chemotherapy. The heart monitor, part of a newly supplied batch of equipment, failed to give any warning when the boy went into cardiac arrest. By the time the staff realized, it was too late. Connor passed away within hours. Marissa was devastated, but refused to stay silent. She filed an official report, demanding that the equipment be investigated. Instead of being heard, she was isolated. The hospital board declared it an isolated incident. Colleagues turned their backs, labeling her a troublemaker. The one person who should have stood by her, Dr. Nathan Hale, her husband, chose silence. Worse, Nathan sided openly with management, claiming it was necessary to protect the hospital's reputation. When Marissa lost her job, Nathan abandoned her and their daughter, quickly remarrying a younger woman from a wealthy family. By this point in her story, Marissa's voice had grown hoarse, but her eyes still held strength. She said, "They took my work, my dignity, and the husband I once trusted. But I still have my daughter, so I must keep standing." Adrian went still. At the name St. Alder, a familiar ache pierced his chest. It was the very place where, years ago, his mother had died during an unusual emergency, surrounded by suspicious signs that never received a clear explanation. His gaze darkened. Inside him welled up something tangled and raw: curiosity, empathy, and the reopening of an old wound. He didn't speak of it. He only looked at Marissa for a long moment before murmuring, "Your story? I understand more than you think." The next morning, Boston's sky was draped in a pale gray. On the cracked concrete steps leading up to apartment 3B, a tall figure appeared, carrying a brown paper bag. Adrian Cross rarely knocked on anyone's door himself, but today was different. The door cracked open. Marissa Hale stood inside, hair loose and disheveled, her face still pale from exhaustion. She looked at him with a mix of caution and surprise. I brought some medicine and a few necessities, Adrian said evenly, not waiting for approval. He lifted the bag. Inside were vitamins, bandages, a few packs of instant porridge, and some fruit. Marissa folded her arms, ready to refuse. You didn't need to go this far. We can take care of ourselves. Adrian's gaze stayed calm, but his words made her falter. Something, Alder. I heard that name from you last night. Marissa froze slightly, her gray-blue eyes flickering. You know, Sainton, Alder. Adrian gave a faint nod. My mother died there. No clear answers. Hearing your story, I'm beginning to understand why. The room fell into silence. Marissa lowered her eyes to her hands, then sighed softly. In his eyes, she didn't see cheap pity, only something very real. Understanding. She stepped into the kitchen, pulled open an old drawer, and took out a thick envelope, its edges worn, sealed with yellowing tape. On a small label was scrawled handwriting. Connor Report, confidential. She set the envelope on the table, her finger resting on its edge, hesitating. Inside are the incident report, internal emails, and even printed delivery slips for the equipment. I tried to send it to the health board, but I was stopped right away. They accused me of falsifying records. I lost my job, lost everything. This is all that's left. Adrian sat down across from her. If you let me have it, I can investigate it fully. I have resources you don't, but I won't force you. Marissa stayed silent for a long time. In her mind, replayed the night Connor died, the face of a mother screaming in despair, the cold eyes of her ex-husband turned away as she begged him to stand with her. All that betrayal pressed into a thin paper envelope. She gripped its edge tightly. If you're like them, if you only want to use this to bargain or polish your name, I will never forgive you. Adrian's voice dropped, steady but weighted. I don't need more reputation. I only need the truth. A pause. Then at last, Marissa slid the envelope across the table. All right, but you must promise if this truth comes to light. It's to prevent deaths like Connor's, not for revenge. Adrian nodded, his eyes glinting with a fierce resolve. I promise. As he carefully tucked the envelope into his coat, a small voice piped up from behind him. Can you stay for pancakes? Both turned. Lila stood at the kitchen doorway, hair tousled, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her innocent eyes, full of hope, looked up at Adrian. Marissa flushed slightly, about to brush it off. Lila, don't bother. But Adrian let out a soft chuckle, rare for him. Pancakes. I'm not much of a cook. That's okay, Lila murmured. Mom's good. You just have to sit. In that instant, warmth seeped into a home long accustomed to cold and scarcity. Marissa looked at her daughter, then at the stranger holding her secret files. The wall of caution still stood, but somewhere, a small crack had formed. That breakfast was only a few slightly burnt pancakes, some fruit, and warm milk. But when Lila giggled, sharing stories from school, when Adrian listened quietly with a gaze he'd never given anyone else, when Marissa saw her daughter's face brighten for the first time, after many dark days, then the old kitchen seemed to glow with a light no lamp could create. When Marissa stepped out to wash the dishes, Adrian remained on the rickety wooden chair, eyes following Lila as she colored. In that shabby kitchen, memories surged back unbidden. At 13, he too had once sat by his mother's hospital bed, waiting for a monitor to sound an alarm that never came. The only man in the family, his father, had already died. When his mother passed, Adrian was left alone in a cold city, with no money, no one to lean on. He did whatever it took to survive, delivering papers at dawn, waiting tables in diners, even sleeping in train stations when he couldn't afford rent. Those years forged an iron habit. No crying, no begging, only moving forward. From an old laptop salvaged secondhand, Adrian taught himself to code, selling small programs to local shops. He scraped every dollar, applied for scholarships, and then launched a tech startup in his early 20s. He failed repeatedly, nearly gave up. But the memory of his mother's desperate eyes kept him standing. Now, Adrian was the head of Crosswell Innovations, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire building data platforms and artificial intelligence. He had it all: power, wealth, and an untouchable position. Yet in the lonely nights of his penthouse, he still felt hollow. No success erased the haunting truth. A broken healthcare system had stolen the mother he loved most. Adrian looked at Lila, her bright, innocent eyes, strangely brave. He knew there were things money or power could never buy. The feeling of belonging to a home. And perhaps fate had given him a chance not to repeat the loss of long ago. They were just three people who had collided by accident after a wrong number. Yet in that moment, a fragile thread of trust began to form between a mother betrayed, a billionaire once alone, and the pure heart of a child. At Crosswell Innovations headquarters, 60th floor, the blue glow of countless screens reflected off Adrian Cross's tense face. Before him were hundreds of lines of data just compiled by his assistant. Ethan Cole, you should see this. Ethan placed down a thick printed file. Adrian flipped quickly through it. The money flow of Helix Care Alliance, a massive healthcare finance conglomerate, unfolded like a maze, dozens of subsidiaries, shell investment funds, all ultimately leading to one familiar name, Andrew Voss, CFO. He siphoned off hundreds of millions from the procurement budget, then covered up deaths by altering the internal log system, Ethan said, his voice tight. Connor was just one of many cases buried. The room was silent. Adrian stared down at the streams of numbers, memories flooding back. His mother dying on a hospital bed from a failed emergency, with no explanation ever given. That haunting had never faded. Start auditing everything, he said, voice low, hoarse. I want it all. The money trail, the signatures, the witnesses. But Helix Care did not stand still to be attacked. Just 1 week later, the media was flooded with headlines. On the giant screen in the conference room, a screaming red banner appeared. Adrian Cross orchestrates healthcare scandal to manipulate AI data. How does Crosswell profit from exposing Helix Care? The broadcast ran doctored footage. Adrian carrying Marissa into the hospital at midnight. Edited to look like a staged performance. Paid experts went on air, insisting Crosswell could exploit this scandal to expand its share in healthcare data. The phones burned hot. A major European partner announced the suspension of cooperation. Crosswell's stock plummeted in 2 straight sessions. Ethan slammed the report down on the table, voice harsh. See, they're flipping the narrative. If you keep pushing, you'll lose everything, the company, your reputation, everything you've built. Adrian sat still, hands clasped, eyes fixed on nothing. His whole life, he had lived in the world of data, of cold lines of code. But what kept him here wasn't numbers. It was the eyes of a little girl clutching an old teddy bear, placing it in his hand as a token of absolute trust. He glanced at the desk drawer, where Mr. Bear lay neatly. For a moment, the emptiness on his shoulders lifted, replaced by a hardened resolve. Ethan, he said slowly, if I back down, how am I any different from Voss, from the rest of them? Adrian, Ethan began, but was cut off. No. I've spent my whole life in glass towers, shielded by power. But now, there's a child who believes I won't abandon her mother. I can't betray that trust. Ethan froze, then turned away, hiding a sigh. He knew once Adrian Cross had decided nothing could move him. In a small East Boston apartment, Marissa also held her phone, eyes fixed on the filthy news reports. Her fingers trembled. Her hand clutched a steaming cup of tea, as though to hold on to a bit of warmth. They said he made it all up. Mom? Lila asked softly, her voice filled with worry. Marissa pulled her daughter close, old fears crashing back the days she had been called a liar, expelled from the hospital. Her heart pounded. And then, as if to drive the blade deeper, an anonymous email landed in her inbox. If you continue, we will sue you for defamation and strip you of custody. An unemployed, unstable woman is not fit to raise a child. Marissa shuddered, her heart constricting. Instinct as a mother urged her to collapse, to grab her daughter and run from it all. But when she looked up into Lila's wide, anxious but bright eyes, waiting for an answer, another fire kindled. She looked straight into her daughter's eyes, her voice resolute. If I stay silent any longer, you'll grow up thinking truth isn't worth defending. But it is, Lila. It always is. That night, under the yellow glow cast across old pages, Marissa reopened her red notebook, the one filled with scribbles from night shifts, the irregularities she had once witnessed. Her slender hand trembled, but the words on the new page appeared firm, steadier than ever before. The conference room on the 47th floor of Crosswell Innovations blazed with light, but the air was thick and heavy, as if a storm was raging within the four glass walls. Outside, the city still pulsed with neon lights, but inside, every leather chair was occupied by tense faces, board members, lawyers, media advisors. At the head of the table, Andrew Voss, CFO of Helix Care, sat composed, his dark blue suit perfectly tailored, gold-rimmed glasses catching the light. In his hands was a thick, red-sealed dossier. A faint smile played on his lips, as though the one holding the real power was not Adrian. Before we address the baseless accusations from Crosswell, Voss began, his voice calm yet sharp as a knife. Allow me to present evidence that Mr. Cross and Miss Marissa Hale here colluded to fabricate this story, to defame Helix Care and manipulate stock. A murmur rippled across the room. Adrian sat still, face frozen, while Marissa shuddered as every gaze turned toward her. Voss opened the dossier, pulling out printed emails. Here, he said, sliding a few pages toward the board. Internal emails showing Mills. Hale contacted Mr. Cross before the incident. Proof that she supplied the story. And Mr. Cross promised financial support. A board member frowned, skimming the text, then looked up. The dates. They coincide with the time of patient Connor's death. Exactly. Voss nodded, the smirk curling higher. Marissa froze. She recognized the emails. They bore her address, her digital signature, but the content was pure fabrication. Cold lines suggesting arrangements. Financial compensation? Her trembling hand pressed against the table. These are forgeries, she cried, but her voice cracked, drowned out by the wave of murmurs. A lawyer stood, tone hard. We also have bank statements from a Crosswell subsidiary to an account under the name Hale, totaling $250,000. Marissa went numb. She had never seen that money. Yet the board now growled with suspicion, eyes drilling into her and Adrian. Ethan leaned close, whispering, Adrian, we should adjourn. If Voss lays it all out, the media will destroy you. Adrian remained upright, gaze like ice, but in his chest, his heart pounded hard. He looked toward Marissa, her face ashen, eyes filled with shame and fear. Voss rose slowly, stepping closer, hand resting on the back of a chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I needn't say much more. An unemployed nurse, a billionaire scrambling to salvage his company. It is obvious why they conspired to invent this tale. The motive is clear, the evidence sufficient. He paused, locking eyes with Marissa. Do you think a woman abandoned by her husband, expelled from her hospital, will be believed? No. You are nothing but a tool. The room went deathly still. Marissa's vision blurred, tears welled, but she bit her lip hard, refusing to cry. Beside her, Adrian stared at Voss as though his gaze could pierce the gold rims of his glasses. At this moment, they stood at the edge of a cliff. One more step, and everything would collapse. The silence grew so heavy that even the ticking clock sounded like it was tearing the air apart. Every gaze bore into Marissa, the one Voss had just called a tool. Marissa lowered her head, both hands clasped tightly together. Her body trembled, but in her mind, the image of Connor's eyes and his mother's anguished screams rose so vividly it tore at her heart. She remembered that night, the silent monitor, the fading heartline, the staff confused and helpless. That wrongful death was the very reason she had been scorned, dismissed, and betrayed by her husband. She drew a deep breath, then suddenly stood. Her voice shook at first, but each word grew steady, like a hammer striking the heavy stones of the room. You want evidence, then hear the truth from the one who was there that night. Every eye locked on her. Voss arched a brow, his mocking smile not yet faded. Connor, Marissa said, her voice breaking and then tightening. 7 years old. Leukemia. The boy trembled in his hospital bed, his heart weakened by chemotherapy. I requested that his heart monitor be replaced during my shift because it kept malfunctioning. They ignored me. That night, he went into cardiac arrest, and not a single alarm sounded. By the time we found him, it was too late. I saw his mother drop to her knees, screaming, begging us to save him. but we couldn't. Marissa paused, drawing a sharp breath, tears streaming down, yet her voice unbroken. The next day, I filed an official report. They buried it. They told me to stay silent, that it was only an isolated incident. And when I refused to stay silent, they fired me. They called me a troublemaker. Even my husband turned his back. The room sank into a deathly stillness. No one moved. A few board members exchanged glances, their eyes wavering. Marissa's fists clenched, her voice flaring like a blade cutting through doubt. I would rather lose everything than live one more day with the shame of silence. Connor died because of this deceit. You may call me anything you like, but I will never stop speaking the truth. Voss let out a mocking laugh, ready to interject. Sentiment cannot replace evidence. How about this? Adrian cut in, his voice sharp as steel. He rose, stepped into the center of the room, a locked case file in his hand. Pages fell across the table. Equipment purchase contracts, Voss's signature, money transfers routed through shell companies and back into his family's accounts. On the giant screen behind, original emails flashed unaltered, uncut, the stark opposite of the evidence Voss had just presented. A board member frowned, lifting his glasses to examine closely. The signature on this contract? It is yours, Voss? Undeniable. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Murmurs turned to outrage. Voss's face drained, his smirk gone. Adrian stepped forward, his deep blue eyes burning. You called Marissa a tool. No, she is the only witness brave enough to stand against this lie. And you, Andrew Voss, are the one who hid the truth, stealing money from the pain of patients. Voss stammered. This is fabricated. I will sue. But his voice broke, swallowed by the rising fury. Several board members had already risen, pounding the table, demanding an independent investigation at once. Marissa still stood, chest heaving, her eyes wet but blazing. Adrian turned toward her, placing the choice in her hands. Before her, he set the laptop, ready to send all the files to the Federal Investigative Committee. The entire room held its breath. Marissa reached forward. Her hand trembled, but her gaze stayed firm. She was no longer the woman collapsed on her kitchen floor, nor the nurse cast aside. One press. The screen flashed. File sent successfully. Marissa whispered, as if to herself, Connor, you will not be forgotten. Voss collapsed into his chair, his face drained of all color. The room erupted in the chaotic noise of truth unveiled. Adrian stood still, watching Marissa. In the harsh white glare of the boardroom, he saw not a victim, but a courageous witness who had chosen truth no matter the cost. News exploded across headlines. After the fateful meeting, federal investigators stepped in. Helix Care Alliance was forced to recall all faulty heart monitors, with a slew of shady contracts exposed. Andrew Voss, the man who once stood smug with a sneer, was now suspended. Facing criminal charges, Adrian reappeared in the media, not as a CEO scrambling to salvage his reputation, but as someone who had dared to choose justice, willing to risk his empire to defend the truth. Crosswell's stock gradually recovered, but in his eyes, victory wasn't in numbers. It was in the peace of finally being able to hold his head high and say, his mother had not died in vain, and Connor would not be forgotten. For Marissa, the doors of major hospitals closed forever. She refused every offer to return to the system, knowing that trust only mattered when it came from the heart. Instead, together with a group of old doctors and nurse colleagues, she opened a small community clinic in a poor neighborhood on the edge of Boston. There, patients were not statistics, but people with stories, with pain, and with hope. On opening day, Adrian appeared in a simple suit. Without entourage or extravagance, he handed over a sponsorship check, then quietly stood in the corner, letting Marissa and her team receive the applause. She knew he was no longer the cold billionaire in the glass tower. He had become someone she and Lila could trust. One day, Marissa unexpectedly ran into Nathan in a courthouse hallway, where he had been summoned for his role in concealing malpractice. His sharp suit could not mask the haggard face and weary eyes of a man who had chosen the wrong path. He slowed, uneasy as he met his ex-wife's gaze. Marissa, she stayed silent. Only Lila pressed closer to her mother's arm. looking at him with unfamiliar eyes. Marissa smiled faintly, not bitter, no longer resentful, just a smile of someone who had moved beyond pain and found her worth. She gave a small nod, then turned away, hand clasping her daughters tightly. Nathan stood still, watching her figure fade. He understood all the power and status he had once chosen could never buy back what mattered most. A family. One autumn afternoon, laughter filled the small apartment kitchen. Lila sat on a chair, giggling as Adrian clumsily stirred a pot of soup, splattering broth everywhere. "Uncle Adrian, you ruined it all." The girl squealed, covering her mouth but eyes sparkling. Adrian pretended sternness, frowning. "Don't call it ruined. This is creative cooking." Marissa stood nearby, wiping her hands on an apron, her gaze softening unconsciously. This scene, the cramped kitchen, steam rising from the soup, her daughter's laughter mingling with the voice of a man who had once been so distant, was a dream she had never dared to imagine. A simple home, but a true one. In the glow of the afternoon light through the window, she saw Adrian tilt his head toward her, his eyes less cold than before, as though, for the first time, he had found where he belonged. No need for grand promises, only someone who won't leave you when you need them most. 6 months later, on a late winter evening, in the small courtyard outside the clinic, thin snow dusted the ground. Marissa had just locked the door when she turned to find Adrian standing there, a small box in his hand. No spectacle, no grand stage. Adrian opened it, revealing a simple silver ring. His voice was deep, warm, with a faint tremor rare for a man like him. "I don't promise to make the world perfect, but I promise I'll never abandon you and Lila. Will you say yes?" Marissa was stunned. Over the years, she had taught herself not to trust promises, but when she looked into his eyes, the ones once cold, now burning with sincerity, she knew her answer. She nodded softly, tears slipping down, but her smile was radiant. From the second-floor window, Lila squealed at the sight, clutching Mr. Bear in her arms, shouting out, "Say yes. Mom, I want Uncle Adrian to stay forever." Laughter and applause rippled through the courtyard. And in that moment, amid Boston's winter chill, a new family had truly begun. Marissa did not find a miracle, but she found someone who wouldn't leave when she needed him most. Adrian, too, from the cold heights of his glass tower, he chose to stand with a small family, and in return found the home he had always longed for. And you, in your life, has anyone ever stepped beside you, just when you thought you couldn't go on? If this story touched you, leave a like so more people can hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because every day we'll bring you new journeys where love and courage create miracles. And don't forget to share the video, for sometimes a small story can become the source of strength someone out there needs.